This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. The Prime Minister of Canada today called his resounding re-election, and I quote, a clear mandate for the free trade pact with the United States he championed. CBS News correspondent Eric Ingberg reports tonight from Toronto.
Canada swallowed its fears of a U.S. economic invasion and gave a decisive victory to its Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and his free trade policies. The Prime Minister announced today that he will recall Parliament in mid-December to pass the agreement making it easier for both nations' businesses to operate across the border.
Somebody said, let the people decide. People have decided.
Businessmen on both sides of the border saw the vote as a major setback for protectionist sentiment around the world.
If we had rejected it, I think politicians would have sat back and said, wait a minute, maybe liberalized trade isn't the way to go. Look at Mulroney. He couldn't sell it to his own people.
So what the Canadian citizens did was they voted about their future as opposed to their past.
The Canadians also spared the staunchly free trade Reagan administration from a backyard foreign policy embarrassment. As if to say thanks, President-elect Bush phoned Mulroney to propose a meeting even before Bush's inauguration.
Our leading trading partner did endorse yesterday the concept that the free trade agreement makes good sense.
The free trade agreement will take effect January 1st if Canada approves it by then. It removes barriers to investment across the border and phases out all remaining tariffs. Mulroney overcame opposition charges that he had sold out to the U.S.
There is in Canada, as in other industrialized countries, a well of anti-Americanism. It happens that it's not enough to elect a dog catcher.
But uneasiness here over American economic power was still evident today. One caller to a radio talk show even wrote new words to the Star-Spangled Banner.
What confusion, what mess, how we cried and did shout when our fellow Canadians sold us all out.
The election was one of the most bitterly fought in Canadian history as treaty opponents played on traditional Canadian fears of losing their unique identity to the U.S. But in the end, the voters went with two very American-sounding issues, prosperity and growth. Eric Ingberg, CBS News, Toronto.
In an optimistic final economic forecast, the Reagan administration today estimated the gross national product will jump at a 3.5% annual rate next year. That's more than 1 point higher than the forecast from many private analysts. On the somewhat less rosy side, President Reagan's budget director, Joe Wright Jr., said today the final Reagan federal budget will require $35 billion in deficit reductions, and Medicare could be among the prime targets. Other proposed cuts could include farm subsidies and retirement benefits for government workers, and CBS News was told tonight defense will not be immune. Meanwhile, the government today reported inflation measured by consumer prices is running at a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 4.6% through the first 10 months of this year. Higher clothing costs and increases in automobile insurance and financing helped push those prices up 0.4% for the month of October. President-elect George Bush met today with a man who's about to grapple with a huge government deficit of his own, the President-elect of Mexico. CBS News National Affairs correspondent Leslie Stahl reports Mr. Bush also tried again today to sell his "I'll reduce the deficit without any new taxes" economic policy, this time during a meeting with Republican governors.
The president-elect took his first post-campaign trip today to Alabama for a Republican governors conference. His message, I did too win a mandate.
The American people, in voting for me, have said in clear terms that the solution to the federal budget deficit is to get better control of spending, keep the economy expanding, and not raise taxes.
Mr. Bush then laid out his domestic agenda, including new federal prisons, merit schools, the Head Start program, and tax breaks for child care, all of which would make for a bigger budget. And still no mention of how he'll cut the deficit. Mr. Bush did say that on the first day of his presidency, he'll name negotiators to represent him in budget talks with Congress. For today, though, he jokingly passed the buck to the Treasury Secretary.
They asked me about the deficit. Talk to Brady.
What do presidents do when domestic issues like the deficit turn sour? They tend to seek refuge in foreign affairs, and that's just where George Bush says he's turning his attention. He flew to Houston to meet the newly elected president of Mexico, Carlos Salinas, who, like Mr. Bush, faces a mountain of federal debt.
And it is vital, and there is far more than symbolism in this early meeting as far as I'm concerned.
Congressional sources say Mr. Bush plans to fill out his foreign policy team early next week by naming former Texas Senator John Tower as his Secretary of Defense, but only if Tower agrees to a number 2 with strong managerial skills.
And which way the tandem is paired is sort of optional. Someone who can deal with Congress, someone who has an understanding of prioritizing the needs within the defense system, and somebody who has management capacity.
One irony in today's trip, the plane that flew Mr. Bush to Texas was the same one that carried John F. Kennedy to Dallas and his body back to Washington exactly 25 years ago today. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, Houston.
There were many other reminders today, other images rushing back from a quarter century ago. For millions of Americans, the assassination of President John Kennedy is not only the stuff of history, it is the fabric of memory. CBS News correspondent Bruce Morton reports on the many ways Americans remembered JFK today.
Moonset. Inside the Capitol, old Peace Corps volunteers remembered.
We miss you, President Kennedy. We miss your guidance, and we miss your challenge to that which was best in us.
Barbara Thomas served in Thailand. David Maniani in Sierra Leone.
Instead, he challenged our comfortable assumptions about ourselves. And that is why I loved him. For me, Jack, it wasn't the glamour. It was the guts.
They remembered him as the dawn came, remembered him for 24 hours, one after another.
We love you, John Kennedy. And we miss you terribly. But we shall continue to serve.
Only part of John Kennedy died 25 years ago. The best of him is still here, in all of us.
At the end, a piper led them out. Others remembered at the flame. Some familiar faces, that's Ethel Kennedy, Eunice and Sergeant Shriver, and a mother who seemed to be explaining to the next generation what had happened.
Realize how much we had then and how much we lost then as a nation.
People remembered in Boston, where some of his words are written on the walls of a park.
He unified the country.
In San Francisco, children talked about what might have happened if he lived.
And the race riots of the late 60s might not have happened.
No one knows exactly how to feel about it, but it's a very personal experience for everybody.
And hundreds came to Dealey Plaza, Dallas, at 12:30, which was when it happened.
It's like the car's going to be here and he's going to be put back together again.
After 25 years, we still love you, John. We still remember.
But there are still things to remember, not just stones and flowers, stronger things. The Peace Corps veterans went to Mass here, in the cathedral where Kennedy's funeral Mass was said.
But something survived that the bullets of the 60s could not stop. An idea survived.
The idea was that the world didn't belong just to the few, that in a democracy we each could matter, could change the world we shared. That idea has taken a battering since in the hard years of wars and assassins, but it lives. Just look around.
And still to come, the day everyone old enough will never forget, the day President Kennedy was assassinated, the day 25 years ago that changed everything. Day for the U.S. stealth bomber, looking like $1 million and reportedly costing $250 million. CBS News Defense Department correspondent David Martin reports on today's high publicity unveiling of the high-tech plane designed to evade enemy radar and deliver a nuclear knockout.
The stealth bomber, Until now, it has evaded public scrutiny as successfully as it is supposed to evade enemy radar. But today, the Air Force rolled out what it officially calls the B-2, claiming it will change the rules of war.
The B-2 is revolutionary. Today, we're not just rolling out America's new strategic bomber. We're ushering in a new age of strategic deterrence.
Stealth is designed to eliminate the sharp angles which reflect radar beams. Where sharp angles can't be avoided, special radar-absorbing material is used. But you can't see what really makes it stealthy. Those techniques remain secret. The effect is to reduce the range of Soviet radar, creating gaps in a system in which the Kremlin has invested tens of billions of dollars, allowing the B-2 to slip through to hit targets like underground command posts and mobile missiles. By the time it gets close enough for radar to detect, it's too late.
Timelines for action by the enemy in terms of launching missiles is so short that it decreases the likelihood that he will be unable to attack the aircraft.
The stealth bomber will not fly until next year, but already 5 more are under construction, using state-of-the-art manufacturing procedures and a workforce of 34,000 people nationwide. The Air Force says it doesn't know the total cost, but estimates run as high as $70 billion for 132 planes.
Stealth bomber is not simply going to be a gold-plated weapon, but cost as much as if it was made of solid gold.
We have seen the future, but we don't know yet how well it works, how much it will cost, or what the Soviets will do to counter it. But now that the stealth bomber has finally been unveiled, the public can at least begin to debate how much a plane like this is really worth. David Martin, CBS News, Palmdale, California.
Hundreds of protesting French coal miners fought today with riot police in Paris. 25 Paris policemen were hurt. The violence broke out after the government turned down the miners' demands for higher pay. One miner said they haven't had a raise in 4 years and barely make the minimum wage. South Africa today approved a peace plan for Southern Africa, already endorsed by Angola and Cuba. The U.S. mediated agreement is expected to be signed next week. It calls for the phased withdrawal of 50,000 Cuban troops from Angola and independence for South Africa-controlled Namibia. Before the election, George Bush said he was for a bill tightening ethics laws for government officials. CBS News White House correspondent Terrence Smith reports the president-elect now is saying little to praise it and even less about the possibility that President Reagan might veto the ethics bill before this week is out.
Vacationing at his California ranch, President Reagan is being besieged by last-minute arguments on both sides of the revolving door ethics bill currently on his desk.
There are a lot of members of the administration and people on the outside who have asked for an opportunity to make their views known to the president on this.
The bill would tighten restrictions on federal officials and, for the first time, members of Congress on lobbying their former agencies or colleagues for at least 1 year. Proponents say the goal is as simple as it is important.
Having the American people believe that the government's not for sale.
But key conservatives in the outgoing cabinet object strenuously to the bill's most restrictive provisions. In a letter to the White House, Interior Secretary Hodel argued that the bill would make it more difficult for the federal government to recruit competent employees, especially at senior levels.
And I urge the House to pass this legislation. Pass it promptly, because it goes to the very heart of proper intentions and the public's perception of honest government.
That was during the campaign, but yesterday, President-elect Bush had no recommendation.
The bill has some pluses, has some minuses, and the president's going to have to make that determination.
If he walks away from that commitment before he's even sworn into office, I think that raises terrible questions about where this administration will stand on ethics in government.
President Reagan has until midnight Friday to sign the bill or kill it. Most of the advice he is getting is running against the legislation, but aides say the president is keenly aware that this decision will be his final comment on ethics in government. Terrence Smith, CBS News, with the president in Santa Barbara.
The product. The proving grounds, the results. STP gas treatment is the edge.
Come Inauguration Day, the new Bush administration inherits a host of foreign policy dilemmas, one of which is El Salvador. There are indications that the soon-to-be President George Bush plans to try to keep U.S. aid at current levels. But as CBS News correspondent Juan Vasquez reports, there are a lot of questions about just how much the country has to show for the billions already spent.
Rosario Landaverde earns $2 a day shoveling sand for sale to cement companies, a backbreaking job that some would consider a curse. But in El Salvador today, any job is a blessing. Thank God for the river, she says. Without it, we'd starve. Poverty in El Salvador is worse than ever, even though the Reagan administration has spent $600 per person to fight a communist-led insurgency and boost a failing economy. Critics say U.S. policy is a sandcastle about to be washed away.
Probably El Salvador could be the first major international crisis for the Bush administration.
After 8 years, El Salvador's war is not over. A recent attack on the National Guard garrison in the capital killed 4 soldiers and wounded more than 30. The increasing use of terrorist car bombs is part of a new effort to expand the war to the city. In the capital, thousands dare to show they oppose the government. In the countryside, the army controls only the area it physically occupies. The mayor of a village less than 10 miles from a big army post had to move his office to the base because 6 mayors from nearby villages have been murdered by the guerrillas recently. Going home is impossible, he says. The Reagan administration has spent more than $3 billion to increase the size of the armed forces 4-fold and to keep El Salvador from falling. The Bush administration will have to keep spending.
We need to continue to help them fight on, because what they're fighting for is a democratic form of government against a bunch of communist guerrillas.
The new Army Chief of Staff says the guerrillas can't win, but U.S. aid has not enabled the government to win either.
Besides 60,000 people who have been killed, now we have more war than we had 8 years ago.
No one can say when it will end. The war consumes so much money and attention that little of the massive U.S. aid trickles down to people like Rosario Landaverde, who believes life is harder than ever. Today, she earned $3 instead of the usual $2. Tomorrow, she'll start all over again. Juan Vasquez, CBS News, San Salvador.
Tropical storm Keith packing rains and 65-mile-an-hour winds powered toward Florida tonight. Forecasters issued a tropical storm warning along a 250-mile stretch of the Gulf Coast and a storm watch for part of the Atlantic coast. Weathermen predicted Keith would hit land before dawn with up to 5 inches of rain. Where were you 25 years ago today? It's a question with deep emotional meaning for those of us who were in Dallas and for countless millions around the world who heard the awful news and remember it as if it were yesterday. 25 years. Our series on the Kennedy assassination continues tonight. Where were you?
Something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong.
3 shots were fired at President
Kennedy has been assassinated.
Oswald has been shot.
I just happened to be standing right at the teleprinter the very moment that the first bulletin came over from Dallas when the United Press had the beat on the story.
Sometimes I think you know me better than Chris does.
I screamed out to everybody, let's get on the air.
And I gave it a great deal of thought, Grandpa.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
I heard it flashed over the news. I said, oh, no, couldn't be. Oh, no.
There has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded.
I was working in the World's Fair at the time, and I remember it quite vividly.
Walter, we have some additional film taken at and near Parkland Hospital, where
I was walking out of the University of Oklahoma library and I saw my roommate and he says to me, "Did you hear what happened in Dallas? Kennedy's been shot." And I looked at him and I said, "You're sick." And some other people standing around looked over at me and said, "He's not kidding, it's serious, it's for real."
Another picture taken just moments before the assassination attempt.
I was in school, Hicksville Junior High School. I remember walking through the halls, usually noisy halls, and it was dead quiet, dead quiet.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left.
I felt numb. How could this happen in a country that is supposed to be so civilized?
Mrs. John F. Kennedy left the hospital at approximately the same time, the coffin carrying...
It was very hard to take because I really worshipped him, you know, and I just can't believe a person could do such a thing. I really can't.
The building holds thousands of school books for Texas children. On this day, it also held a killer.
As we sat sort of motionless watching the TV, my husband said, "That's exactly what's going to happen to me. I don't expect to survive this revolution. Our society is too sick."
We were due to do a concert that night on November 22nd in Dallas. Got on the phone and canceled the concert, and then got on the phone to the airport and asked them what the next flight out was. And the woman said, "To where?" And we said, "To anywhere."
We're never really kids anymore after that. Life just wasn't Mickey Mouse and rock and roll and shiny cars. It was different. Everything was different after that.
Our series concludes tomorrow night with Bob McNamara on the class of '63, the young Americans who came of age a quarter century ago. For now, that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, boxer Donnie Lalonde, abused as a child today, speaking out against child abuse.
Also, Neil Simon on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.